So my name is Eleanor and I'm from The Big Draw. I'm the communications and marketing manager, and it's been really brilliant to work with Hannah over this week and to help her, to support her in her residency. She's done some amazing things, as you've seen already on social media, building up her map of wonderful and charismatic critters. And today's workshop is your kind of, your the other bookend to your residency after Monday's fly workshop, where we had a closer look at blowflies. Didn't know there were some significant anatomical differences between male and female flies, so we all came away from that one with a lot more things to to think about. And today we're going to take a closer look at bats. We're also joined by Dr. Susan Tsang. Thank you very much for joining us. And Hannah, I will also then pass over to you to take us away.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Elle. So I'm Hana Ayoob. I am a science communicator and an illustrator with a background in zoology. As Ellen has said, my residency this week has been focusing on uncharismatic critters, which is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, I should say. I very much tend to find all these animals charismatic. I love them. I especially love to draw them. And it's been a really lovely week, and I'm very excited about this final workshop where we are going to draw a bat. Today I am joined by Susan, who researches bats, especially those in Southeast Asia. Susan, would you like to tell us a little bit more about you and your work?
Sure, and thank you for having me. So I work on these bats called flying foxes, which a lot of people have seen in pictures from like Australia, especially, but do a lot of bat rescue. And I work specifically in Indonesia and the Philippines and all over some other Southeast Asian countries, and hopefully can go back there again soon in hopefully maybe the fall or the winter, whenever we're allowed to. I work on the evolution of bats, but because I go to a lot of these places where a lot of people have not gone to in decades, I am often also the person who is doing conservation of these bats. A lot of these bats are threatened by not only the kind of regular things you think about in the tropics, like habitat loss, but also hunting. These bats are targeted because they're so big and they are so easy to find for large groups of them, at least some of these species. And so they become very threatened because of the fact that people will just go out and take a bunch of them from the roost and bring them to the market. And bats are not like rodents where they can just have a lot of babies in when they litter, they actually only have one pup per year. And so their rate of reproduction is very slow. And so this kind of hunting is actually very detrimental to their populations over time. And given a lot of the, conversation around what we've been talking about with COVID recently and also the pandemic, we also work a lot with disease ecology prior to this and understanding how the evolution of bats actually plays into the evolution of viruses, whether they be harmful or not harmful. And for the most part, viruses are not harmful. They're just kind of around us. And bats have somehow gotten the superpower of being able to tolerate and live with them. And so they are much better than us, actually. And we need to learn from them. So I am happy to take any questions today about bats in any form, about bats that I work on in Southeast Asia, or even bats where I live in North America. And I am happy to, hopefully make everybody else also fall in love with bats.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Susan. I'll come back to you a bit later with lots of questions. Sure. And if anyone else has any questions, please do pop them in the chat and we'll get to those in a little bit. But first, I am going to talk everyone through drawing some bats. So I'm just going to spotlight my table so everyone should be able to see this. I'm going to work through drawing two bats from slightly different angles today. So first off, I'll get my page out. I'm going to do a bat that's sort of facing you with its wings outstretched. And then we'll work through drawing a sort of very similar bat, but with its face sort of pointing forward as it flies. And hopefully, because the wing structures will be quite similar in both drawings, if you miss any steps, you will be able to catch up with those. Okay, so the first thing on our first drawing that I want everyone to do is to draw a little sort of head shape. So it's going to be sort of rounded shape with a little snout like that. Sort of reminds me a little. So we've got a hand up. Got two hands up. Ruth, I'll quickly allow you to talk because I think or you can post in the chat.
Do we need it landscape or portrait?
Landscape will probably be better.
Okay.
Okay, so once you've got your face, we're going to add some eyes to this. Now, in my sort of original drawings that I did for this, I did slightly more accurate eyes, but my bats tended to look quite scary. So I'm going to do slightly more cartoony eyes today. So little sort of googly eyes that you should just about be able to see there. And then we're going to do 2 little nostrils at the bottom. And then I'm going to add 2 ears. So one on that side and then another one on that side. And then 2 sort of lines on the side of the ears, which just sort of shows that the ears are sort of curling over a little bit. Now, once you've done that, we're going to draw the body. So if you could just do sort of 2 dots slightly lower and sort of equal sides of that nose so that we can keep it sort of on the same side. And then from each side, I want you to draw a line going down and curving in slightly like that. And then the same on the other side. And then sort of bring that line down, going straight down. And same on the other side. And then we're going to draw in the feet. And the feet each have sort of 5 toes. But depending on the size of your pen or the size of your picture, you might not be able to draw all of those in individually. I'm going to try. And then sort of go up and down, and you've got your bat's feet. So next up, we're going to do the wings. Now, I have a tendency to draw from right to left. I'm going to try not to do that too much today because it tends to get everyone else's drawings a bit smudged. But we're going to do a line here, touching the face, and another one on the other side. And then going up from each of those lines, I'm going to do a little point like that. And then we're going to draw another line curving down and another one on the other side, like so. And then from this point, we're going to do a curve up and down like that. And then another one. And then another curve that joins to the foot. Then we're going to do the same in reverse on the other side, like so. And then once we've got that, we are going to add in the arms of the bat. And before we do that, I just want to show you, if I can get this book, very heavy book, under the camera, a skeleton of a bat, because I think when you're drawing bats, it's really useful to remember that their arms are actually really similar to ours under that wing. So, you know, you've got a thumb up at the top and then sort of 4 more fingers or digits coming down from that joint. And so we're going to draw in an arm. So from that point there, that's the thumb. Might not be using 100% anatomically correct information here. Susan, I'm sure you can correct me later if you need to. But we're going to go down and up, which sort of forms a shoulder for the bat. And then I'm going to do the same on the other side, like so. And then the first finger sort of extends along the top of the wing. I'm going to do the same on the other side. The second one goes to that point, that topmost point on the wing. Like that. And then the third one sort of bends down to the second point. And then finally, I've got one more coming down to this point here. And then we can join that back to the arms and back to the body. And there we've got our first bat. Now, if you are happy with the bat that you've drawn, feel free to start colouring it in or doodling on it or whatever you'd like. In the meantime, I'm going to draw another bat, and we'll do the wings in a very similar way. But like this one, it's going to be facing forward. So for this one, we are going to do a little curved sort of snout going up like that. And then you can add some nostrils at the front if you'd like. We're going to add on some ears. Then, same as last time, you're going to do 2 dots like that, just sort of below the snout, and do a body curving in and then out again. And give the bat some little feet. Okay. And then this time I'm going to draw in the hands first and then sort of add the wing, just to sort of do it a slightly different way in case the first way you couldn't quite keep up with. But I think it also shows how the wings are sort of attached to the bat. So we're going to do an arm that goes down and up like that. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. I definitely find doing sort of one side and then the other and swapping back and forth a lot easier for me. If you'd rather do one whole side of the body first and then move over, that is also fine. It's going to have that thumb going up. And the same on this side. And then we're going to do the first sort of shorter finger going straight out. Then another one quite close but curving slightly down. Then we're going to do the finger that sort of bends slightly like so. And then finally one that goes straight down. Then once you've done that, we're going to add some wings. So I'm going to join up that sort of thumb to the body on each side. Then going to join this finger to that finger on both sides like that. And then do curves coming down, joining those digits and joining back to the body. And the same on the other side. I've realised what I didn't do on the previous drawing is actually to add this sort of end of the wings in between the legs like that. So I'll just go leave that one up for a bit. I'll add that later. So hopefully you've drawn at least one bat. I'm now going to just share a link to a Padlet, which is a web page, in the chat, and then I'll explain a bit more about it. Just get chat up. And I'm going to share my screen. So you should be able to see this webpage with a few bat pictures on it. I'll also show you these under the camera in a second. But the Padlet is a webpage that you can access on your computer, tablet or phone, whatever device you're using to get on to Zoom. Or you can also access it on a different device. So quite often if I'm in workshops, I'll open up a Padlet on my phone whilst I've got Zoom on a computer screen. And you could either use Padlet to refer to these example images whilst you're finishing your drawing, or you can also add your own images, whether those are drawings in progress or finished drawings during the workshop or afterwards. You just go to this sort of big pink plus button in the corner, and you should be able to upload a photo. So I'll just show you what that looks like. And then you can either click on the camera icon to take a photo or click on the arrow icon to upload a photo. If that doesn't work for you, please don't worry. It's also fine if you don't want to share, but you can also share on social media and we will pick that up later. I'm sure Elle will be able to post details for social media in the chat. So I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen and show you a few example images. So there's lots of different ways that you can decorate your bat. If you've seen any of my work before, you might know that I tend to go for quite intricate and patterned and decorative things on a lot of my drawings. So I try to go for accuracy, but I often take quite a lot of artistic license as well. So here is a bat that's quite a plain one. We've got one that's just being sort of coloured in with felt tips as well. So you could go for something like that. This I am slightly ridiculously happy with. I decided to draw in lots. So this, I should have said that this bat is based on a Malayan flying fox. And I decided to draw on lots of different fruit that it eats and also some durian flowers, which it likes to drink the nectar from, which also made me miss a lot of the tropical fruit that I grew up with. This is another quite intricate one. So it's sort of filled with mandala-like patterns, which is where a lot of my art style sort of started. And of course, you don't need to do anything this intricate. You could decide to draw something else. You could decide to do something quite simple. Or if you tend to prefer quite realistic artwork, you could colour in some fur or something else on your bat. So I'm going to keep drawing on one of mine. And I'm also going to have a chat with Susan about her work and a bit more about bats. So do keep your questions coming. I'm going to remove the spotlight from my table. So if you want to flip to sort of a gallery view, you'll be able to see all of us. But if you prefer, you should also be able to click on sort of 3 dots on the image of my table and click pin if you'd rather just see the drawing. So Susan, we've had our first question, which is, do flying foxes have tails?
So that is actually something that's very relevant to what we're doing right now, because you're going to draw them, right? So flying foxes do not have tails. They're actually one of the only bats that don't have tails. And it makes my life really easy because it's one of the measurements you have to take when you actually go out and do research for them, when you record them. So fortunately they don't. Other old world fruit bats, like if you see a rosette bat or a short-nosed fruit bat, all the ones that are kind of around cities and stuff, they all still have tails. So flying foxes are one of the only bats that don't have tails.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. Because I think when I was planning the drawing instructions for this, I was a bit like, do they definitely not? Like, I was looking at loads of photos and Googling. I was like, no, they definitely don't have tails. Okay.
Yeah, it's one of the weird things about them. They're the only bats that don't have tails. So it's very relevant and very confusing, I think, to most people because they expect them to have tails. And a lot of times, and you'll see that with the little bit between their legs, right? You only see the leathery part that connects the wings, and in other bats you'll see the tail coming through there, and you'll see that it connects to the legs and then to the tail, so it makes another little divot like that. But you don't have that in flying foxes. They just don't have them. There's no point for them to have it.
Do we know why did they lose them or did they not evolve?
They
tail?
lost them probably.
Okay.
Or so basically, if you look at all the other bats that they evolved from and other bats in general, they all have them. And so being how flying foxes evolved into what they are and are not one of the more early evolving types of bats, they probably just lost them. And I don't really think we know exactly why, but it probably has to do with the fact that it's in how they fly, and also just they don't need to use them in the same way that other bats do. So for instance, a lot of insect bats that catch insects on the fly, they will actually use that extra bit of wing skin, and then they have their tail to control it. They actually use it to scoop up insects also. So you'll see these insect bats, they'll fly towards an insect and kind of bend over halfway because they'll have a moth that they caught in there between their little legs and then just scoop them up in their mouths. And on top of that, on some level, it's probably related to in flying foxes how they probably can use them for better control in some ways for long distance flying. And we don't really know enough about it because not enough people have studied bats. So something that's still an open question, I think, for why is it that some bats have it and what is the benefit of not having it versus having it? And it varies across different species, obviously.
That's really interesting. Thank you so much, Alexandra, for the question. So I guess something I'm particularly interested in is how did you get into studying bats?
So when I was an undergrad, I studied birds, and I really just in general like flying. I think the ability for an animal to fly is one of the most fascinating traits that they can actually evolve, and ecologically it gives them so many opportunities that other animals don't have, but also it's just really interesting to be able to go wherever you want. And a lot of animals that do this have seen this explosion kind of in their species diversity, in the spaces that they can occupy, and the kinds of ecological niches that they can go into. And that particular aspect of bats makes them unique amongst mammals because they're the only mammals that are capable of true flight, which means, powering it by their own wings. Any other mammal that has the word flying in front of it is actually gliding. They're not actually flying through their own power. And so, bats are like expressly unique. And that's why there's so many species of them in the world. There's over 1,400 species of them. And we are still in the middle of describing even more species as we go deeper and deeper into places that we were not able to explore before, as we get better technology with being able to detect sonar and being able to detect genetics and all these other things that are tools that allow us to identify species and differentiate them. So we are still in this process of discovery actually with bats, and that's actually why there's still a lot of papers that are like, new species from blah, blah, blah place. And you compare that to other mammals and that doesn't happen as often.
Yeah. That's really interesting. For anyone else joining from the UK, I think I found out this morning that a quarter of our mammal species here are bats, which was something I didn't know before, which is really nice to know.
Yeah, they're the second most species rich type of mammal. Rodents are 20% of all mammals and bats are 25% of all mammals.
Oh, wow.
And so there are lots and lots of species, and people don't seem to realize that because when they think of a bat, they think of maybe one or two types of bats around them. And that's about it, and people usually think that that's all bats are like that. But in reality, there are so many different types of species, and people are just not conscious of them because a lot of zoos don't have a lot of bats. They're very difficult to take care of. And on top of that, bats are nocturnal, so you wouldn't just run into them even if you went on vacation somewhere where you could go to like an eco tour, because usually people won't bring you out for those types of tours or where you would go out at night. Though a lot of places now, like museums, like in New York and the American Museum of Natural History, we have like bat walks where people will bring them out to Central Park around dusk, and you can kind of see a couple of the species, and people will bring echolocation detectors to kind of show you the sonar and what it looks like. And people are starting to do more of those types of activities, but it's not very common everywhere yet.
That's amazing. It's interesting what you're saying about the familiarity and not seeing them, because I think I pretty much fell in love with bats because Singapore Zoo has quite a lot of them.
Yes.
And sorry, go on.
I've actually been, I've been there a lot because I worked in Singapore. I stayed for a summer for a fellowship in Singapore, and one of the things I did was go into the zoo every week, like once, because I asked them for permission if I could collect the feces from their bats. And they're just kind of like, sure, like why would you want them? So I had a permission to, and I had to go into the aviary where they had them. There are two aviaries. One of them is mixed with all these other birds, and the other one is in this mangrove walk that they've set up. And if you go at night, the zookeepers put out fruits near the boardwalk of the mangrove walk so that the bats will come down and eat them. And at night, I had these people come up to me and they're watching me like scrape poop off of the boardwalk. And they're like, what are you doing? Do you work here? And I'm like, I don't work here per se, but I am a researcher. I'm allowed to do this. So people thought it was very strange, I think.
Oh, yeah. No, because I think that was when I first was just like, they're actually, you know, quite sort of furry and cute to me. And
Oh yeah,
a friend described. Sorry, go on.
No, at night they put the bananas there, and you'll just see them stuff their whole head into it.
Yeah. A friend described bats as like puppies with wings recently, and I was like, yes. I definitely agree. So we've had a couple. Yeah. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, we definitely call them sky puppies for the flying foxes. But if you look at pictures of some of the other bats, you'll see that they have there's for instance, there's a bat that has a very puffy mane around it, kind of. So we call them sky lions. And there's a lot of sky blank that you can fill in for bats because they have so many differing features and there's so many species of them. So yeah, sky puppies are pretty appropriate.
We've had a few more questions. So the first one from Sarah Green was, how does the sonar location work?
So sonar, which is in bats called echolocation, it works in a very similar fashion like it does with other animals that do the same thing, where they will emit a sound from their throat that is a certain frequency, and it will hit something and it will bounce back towards them and their ears will pick it up. And they kind of know how far it is. And a lot of the research that goes into this is actually really complicated because it has to do with physics and how, frequencies and waves travel. So bats have to modulate, like listening to if something is getting closer to them, then the way that they hear it is slightly different. What they hear is slightly different. And so they have to know how to pick up those sounds. But basically, a lot of bat species have their own frequency. So the differences between species sometimes, even though they look very similar, might be that they have different echolocation frequencies. And so they're hearing slightly different pitches. And so that's how they know that that's them. And aside from the echolocation calls, you still have bats that do social calls, which are the ones that you can kind of hear when if you're near a giant colony of these flying foxes, you'll hear a lot of like, kind of thing. And it's their social calls of calling to each other. And it's usually, get out of my face, this is my space. Or if it's like a pup in a cave somewhere, it's like, where's my mom? It's like they're having social calls with each other. And flying foxes don't actually echolocate. So flying foxes are some of the only bats that also, as a group, don't echolocate. They actually rely on smell and sight in order to navigate and to forage. And most other bats that people think of when they're in North America or when they're in Europe are actually bats that do echolocate, since that's part of the larger group of bats in the world, and that's part of the larger group of physiological traits that they have. So the bats that I work on happen to not echolocate, but because I get asked a lot of echolocation, I have to learn basically why and how bats echolocate. But yeah, it's a complicated process when you really want to get into the nitty gritty of it. But the simple part is that basically they emit a sound and then it bounces back at them to tell them where something is based on the distance. The pitch will vary slightly. And you see the same kind of echolocation with dolphins and other animals that you see in nature that echolocate. They actually echolocate in a very similar fashion. So it's not really it's unique to bats and how they travel at night, but you also see this being a solution for other animals that do not have the same type of ability to have visual cues in the same way.
It's really interesting. So another question we've had is, how large are the bats?
So bats can vary a great deal in size. With flying foxes, they are the largest bats in the world. So with these bats, they are very, very, very big. If you take your forearm, like I'm an adult human being, the forearm of me is the length of a flying fox, like a large flying fox. And that is the largest species in the world. So their wingspan, when they spread their fingers out to make that wing, is anywhere from 5 to 6 feet, which is about like 1.5 meters-ish. And 1.5 to 2 meters-ish. And they can actually be quite large, and yet they only weigh about 1.5 to 2 kilos at most. So their mass is actually centralized in their body, even though they're so big. If you look at the bats, so that are insect bats, and even with other smaller fruit bats, they are significantly smaller. So most of the bats in the world that you're thinking of, and most people will associate with like a bat, are the size of like your fist, and probably smaller actually. If you're looking at insect bats that are in caves that are nearby, like where I live in North America or in Europe, they're probably about that big. Their heads are very small. The heads of these flying foxes are so much bigger than these other bats that sometimes some of my colleagues who work on insect bats, they'll tell me that, the skull of my bat is the size of their bat, period. And that's this big disparity in size that's in these species. And the smallest bat in the world is the bumblebee bat, which is in Thailand and Myanmar, and that's basically the size of like the front of my thumb almost. It's very, very small. So yeah, you have this huge disparity in size, even though you would think that they would all be kind of about the same, but that's because they all adapt to slightly different ecological forces. They have different niches in terms of what their diets are. They have different places in which they live. They have different ways in which they adapt to how much they migrate or disperse over a season. And so there's a lot of variability because of that. But they are extremely light because they have to fly. So, you're going to get bats that are going to be very small. They're going to be maybe like 10 grams. And they're going to get even these bigger guys are maximally 2 kilos. And they're not going to really get bigger than that in terms of weight, because otherwise it doesn't allow them to fly. A lot of the pictures that people send around the internet where they're like, oh, there's these like human-sized bats, it's not really human size. And it's just this weird perspective that people have with the pictures. So maximally, the bats only do go to be about the length of my forearm. And in terms of human size, it's only the wingspan. Like if you have them fully open their wingspan, not actually the body itself.
It's really interesting. Thank you so much. If anyone else has got any questions, do keep them coming. I guess something I want to ask is, do you have a favorite species when you finish drinking?
I think everybody who asked me knows that I am very much biased towards flying foxes. And out of all of them, I do have a favorite species. It is the one that I have been trying to capture for a very long time in Indonesia, which I've barely missed every single time. They are really similar in terms of like the body to how Malayan flying foxes are, the large flying fox that you're drawing. But instead of being very svelte, they have these giant pectoral muscles, and they look like they went to the gym a lot. So they're like really buff, but big bats. They have really broad heads and very large skulls compared to some of the other flying foxes, and that's because the fruits that they eat are bigger and harder. And that's one of the species where they have this really beautiful, like pale little tummy, but they have this like reddish brown color to the rest of them. And so it's very striking when you see them fly above you, and you see this like little white patch kind of going by on top of it. That has been very difficult for me to capture. They're only found in this one or two little islands in Indonesia in the middle of nowhere, basically. And so they are not the easiest thing to find, even when they're supposed to be on this very small island, because they are very good at hiding, and they don't like to roost at the top of the canopies. They roost a little bit lower than the canopy, so sometimes you might miss them on the tree line because other trees are blocking it. And they like to co-roost with other flying foxes that are similarly sized, where from far away they look about the same size, but when you have them in your hand, you can tell that one is a little bit skinnier than the other. And the other bats that they hang out with are also this very dark reddish color, and they're very striking. But because they're mixed together, sometimes you can't just target a net to try to capture that one species. You might get the other one, and because the other one's more abundant, you tend to get a lot of those. And so that's my it's like my white whale kind of,
That's cool. Another question: where do flying foxes roost?
So flying foxes are what we call foliage roosters. They roost in trees, and they tend to, depending on the species, they tend to actually go into these trees, and then the large colonies of them will strip off the leaves from the tops of the trees, and then they all just hang out there. So when you go to places in Indonesia or some of the places even in the Philippines, you'll see that there's a very large mangrove with all these trees that have suddenly no leaves except for these little black blobs on them, and those are flying foxes. There are other flying foxes, though, that they are not in these big colonies, and instead they like to roost and hide between tree leaves, and then they don't really, telegraph that they're there. They just, need them to hide out. And so in general, if there is a tree species that they like, since different species associate with different tree species, they will then just, be found most commonly in those places. And we try to look kind of out for them if we are trying to, source them and find them and do recon on them, whatever. If you go to a botanical garden, you'll kind of see the same thing, where you see there are bats that will like living together in certain trees, and those trees tend to be really high, and they are usually the ones that are hopefully like away from people, at least in the botanical gardens where they do hide out in Southeast Asia. That's usually the case. They don't like to be near other animals if possible. But you will see sometimes in near the roost, you'll see these like sea eagles and other stuff that like hunts the bats. They'll come and they'll disturb the bats during the daytime, and they'll kind of rustle them up in these trees, and the bats will start like swirling above them, and the eagles will try to grab one of them on the wing. So yeah, they're just kind of open in the air, and that's part of the ecology of them, is that they don't go into this daily hibernation cycle like a lot of cave bats do. And so you actually see them be awake and, you know, fanning themselves as it's hot, and you'll see them react to when a predator comes down and tries to grab them. They'll actually be awake and alert, and so they'll wake up and they'll do their little swirling flying.
Great. Okay, I was just going to say, if anyone would like to share anything they've been working on, either to the Padlet or, you know, share them on Twitter, we might be able to share a few in a few minutes. In the meantime, I had another question, which was, you mentioned that eagles predate on the bats. What other sort of natural predators do they have?
So with the smaller flying foxes or the smaller old world fruit bats, you also have owls that go after them.
Okay.
Owls have actually been a problem for me in my research sometimes, because when we capture some of the more medium-sized flying foxes, or the medium-sized fruit bats are about this big instead of this big, owls will also run into the same mist net that we try to capture them in.
Right.
Like they will hear the distress calls of a bat that runs into a mist net, and then they themselves will also run into it to try to capture this bat and then get stuck. And at times you get the same owl running into the same net over and over again in one night. And so then you have to get the owl and set them aside also. I've had a grumpy owl once in a net, and then get very angry at me that it was like, this is the third time I've run into this net. And then in other cases, you see a lot of snakes. In some places will go after flying foxes also. Snakes you actually see go after smaller bats here also. A lot of those snakes that we see that go after flying foxes really in the South Pacific especially are invasive. So people brought them to those islands, and then now they're killing the bats really, really quickly, and the bats are not really used to dealing with them. There's no like natural defense that they have against them, so they're crashing in their populations because of that. And you see this is the case also with other invasive animals, like with feral cats, for instance, in some of these Pacific islands, where cats are very good at being hunters, and these bats are basically stationary in these colonies, and so the cats can go after them very easily. And you have other animals like invasive crazy ants that are in Christmas Island, which is a little island that is south of Indonesia. It's actually part of, politically, it's part of Australia. And these crazy ants are disturbing the bats in a way where, you know, they can't really rest during the day, and so a lot of their energy is spent trying to deal with these ants kind of crawling all over them. And then on top of that, you know, the government is spraying for these ants, and that might be something that's also disturbing the bats. So you have those kinds of disturbances also. And then just sometimes you just have some of these bats, they will, like the pups might fall from their moms, and so they will fall to the ground and they get hunted by whatever is around there. And so they're fairly vulnerable actually, because they're so conspicuous and they're very loud, the colony. And so it's very easy for eagles to find them and grab them, especially if they're going after a colony where there's thousands of bats and all they have to do is catch one. So it's rather impressive though when you see eagles hunt them, just because the eagles themselves tend to be fairly large eagles. In Malaysia, they've also recorded where there was an eagle that captured a bat, and the bat is struggling trying to escape, and these bats are very wriggly. They are very good at escaping. And so what the eagle did was drop the bat in the ocean and then like ground it a little bit and then picked it up again. And then like went and ate it. And it's very smart of the eagle, but at the same time, like, that's the behavior I've never seen before. But that is how, you know, they predate on them, because the bats are very sturdy and tough. And so the bats will not just kind of go down easy.
So we've only got a few minutes left. We haven't got any artwork that has been shared that I can see, but if anyone would like to share them afterwards, please do. If anyone's got any last questions for Susan, do let us know. If people want to help protect bats, anywhere in the world, do you have any advice on what they can do personally?
So working on bats is a very specialized field. So sometimes working with NGOs that are part of this effort already to work on bats is one of the best ways to help out. Might be volunteering your time or donating to them. In the UK, the Bat Conservation Trust is one of those big NGOs. In the US, we have the Bat Conservation International. Both groups are, US, UK based, but they work internationally. And often they are involved with scientists who are working on these problems all around the world. The other thing I would actually say that people can actually do is just convince other people to like bats, because one of the difficulties that we face as scientists is that nobody wants to listen to us because they're already very afraid of animals, or they are just, very wary of them because they think they're like gross, or they think they're, not cute or whatever. If you convince one other person that, bats are our friends. And even if not our friends, just they're not something that's trying to harm you, it's already very helpful, because for us, being able to actually have the door open for people to listen to us requires that people are receptive in the first place to an animal. And that comes often with other people telling them that these animals are interesting or cool, or, are something that we should care about. So I think that if you can go out and convince one other person to like bats, it's already very helpful to us as bat scientists. And if you're able to, donate to NGOs that work on bat groups, that's also very helpful. If you're in places like in the US, where we have had a lot of difficulties with white nose syndrome, this fungus that has really crashed our bat populations, a lot of groups locally are also working on building bat houses so that bats have places to live instead of these caves that might be infected with fungus that might harm them. So you can always look on the BCI website. It's just batcon.org, where they will have instructions on how you can get the right kinds of wood to build them and things like that. And they'll give you instructions for suggestions for where you can place those bat houses so that bats will come and populate them. And if you work in the tropics like I do, it's also just convincing other people near you to not try to get them to leave your house, because a lot of times they co-roost in urban areas, and people try to just get them, they try to shoo them away because they think they're like noisy or stinky or something like that. And if you can convince your neighbors to not try to get them to go away and just let them be, that's also very helpful.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Susan. I was just going to, for anyone who is in the UK, the Bat Conservation Trust also have really good information on sort of what to do if you find a bat in your house, or an injured bat. And they have lots of local groups around the UK as well. But thank you very, very much, Susan, and thank you to everyone who has given us these amazing questions during the session as well. Hi, Elle.
Hi, I have returned. Because we are almost
magically
session, like an apparition. I just appear. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. It's been really good fun. I have learned so much about bats that I didn't know. We've had some really great questions. Susan, your knowledge is impressive. Obviously, you've been doing it for a very, very long time, but yeah, you obviously know so much. And good luck finding the elusive species. Let us know when if you're ever able to capture them. Send us a picture of the flash of white as
it goes by me.
Yeah, no, just be like, oh, remember that one. Thank you everyone for joining us. Hannah's residency is ongoing today. I'm sure she has some wonderful pictures from her sketchbook to share with us, and her ongoing map. I think I don't know if you want to share with everyone here about what you plan to do with your map, Hannah.
Yes, so the map has been gradually more and more populated this week, but is not going to be finished today, much as I hoped. It's been taken partly because I keep falling down rabbit holes of like reading about species that people have suggested, but I'll be working on that probably over the next month or so, and then we will do a big sort of grand reveal, and it should also be available for people to get their hands on their own copy. So watch, there'll be more information on my social media and the big draws when we know more about that. And then otherwise, residency, I'll be sharing a sketchbook sort of video flip through later, and I'm sure I'll be posting some more map photos today as well.
Perfect. Yeah, if you have enjoyed this residency, which we really do hope that you have, I have learned so much. We do have a few more coming up, so do stay tuned to hear more about that. They're spread out over July. Wait, yes, it is July now. June, that ship sailed. spread over this month and into August as well. So do join us in discovering these wonderful new artists that we've been able to discover through that particular opportunity. Thank you to Arts Council England for making it all possible. And thank you, Hannah, for applying and for creating this whole idea of being able to get people on board through drawing with those animals that maybe we consider to be slightly less cute. But of course, bats are cute. I can't believe, Susan, there's one, did you say the one the size of your thumb compared to the size of your arm?
Little ones and big ones.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. Do feel free to share your bats with us if you would like to on Twitter or Instagram. You can also direct message them to us if you would rather just share them with us without actually having to post online. That's absolutely fine. And do join me in thanking Hannah and Susan for joining us. It's been really fascinating.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for having me.